So my first topic of discussion, just want to get right into it. You know, as part of the conservative movement, and of course a lot of think tankers here and research people, you know, we love our stats, we love our facts, and the fact is, much of our stats and our facts effectively contradict a lot of the falsehoods and misstatements from the other side. So, Merrie, if we can't use our facts and our stats, can you tell us a little bit how to communicate more effectively on the battlefield of the energy issue?
This is going to be a shocker. Okay, wait for it. You tell a story, right? That's why I went through the enlistment technique, because you can't just grab somebody by the lapels. One of the underlying things that I want to get to is that stats imply that we're going to educate you. Okay, and if you sit somebody down and say, "I'm going to educate you," what's their response? I'm out of here. If you ask them a question, though, you say, "Can I tell you a story?" They're generally going to say, "Yes." Can I try one?
Sure.
Okay. Got props. Okay. Who here has heard of Georgetown, Texas? A couple people. Okay. Georgetown. Yeah. Great. Okay. So this is a fable, which is a variety of story. In 2012, Georgetown and they got national attention. They announced that they were going to be 100% powered by wind and solar. What do you think? Sound good? And so they negotiated, and they went 100% powered by wind and solar in 2012. And guess what? They're bankrupt.
End of story.
Because here's the thing, though. The city manager, poor David Morgan, I really feel for this guy. His plaint is, but all the projections showed increase in energy costs and a shortage in supply. Boo-hoo. And so they bet big on this. And, of course, what happened? Okay, energy costs went, as we've just learned, down, right? And the shortage in supply didn't happen. Instead, supplies went up. So the real question is, and I think one of our guests mentioned this, is really the question is, who do you trust to forecast the future? Is it the government? You want to be like Georgetown? Or is it the citizen? Okay, which would you put your trust in? Okay, it's up to you. Okay, but we've got a wonderful little thing, and I feel so sorry for this guy because his projection back in 2012 didn't turn out that way. Okay, but then when you say to people, how many other, can I keep going on this?
Sure.
Okay. Actually, I got another one coming up too, so I'll turn it over to him, then I'll come back for projection number 2.
So, Dr. Rossiter, one of the interesting things, one of the differences between our two panelists here is Merrie is such a good communicator in terms of the public and the general audience, but Dr. Rossiter, you communicate mostly with lawmakers and policymakers. What is the biggest difference in terms of trying to get a message across to a policymaker or a lawmaker to try to get them to do the right thing in terms of how they vote and the policies they support?
Thanks very much. Everything working here, Brian?
Solar power.
Well, I should just say in advance that as Kathleen Hartnett-White found out when she first invited me to come speak at a Crossroads conference about 5 years ago, I'm not part of the conservative movement that you introduced us as. I come at this from a very different perspective. Having worked for the Democrats in the House and in the Senate, and with Republicans as well in a bipartisan caucus, I saw a lot of real master communicators, like you saw this morning when the congressman spoke here, who, as appropriate to your instruction, answer the question that they wish to answer and do extremely well. But I think our exchange this morning, when I tried to push the congressman on how he handles fears of the climate catastrophe, the Armageddon, which is driving all of this policy and justifies all this policy. He started out with saying he drives a hybrid. He's trying to disarm people because he doesn't want to upset anybody. And I've run for Congress, and I can tell you your main goal is not to upset anybody. You're nodding here. By the end, he told the greatest story you've ever heard about the Secretary of Energy predicting Texas would be a dust bowl in 10 years, and this guy's going fishing. I wish he'd started with that. That sort of shows the problem we face in communicating with the Congress. The members have to get reelected. Before you can save the world, you have to save your seat. And their job is not to be the primary educators on basic science, basic economics. The world can only stand so many Phil Grahams. Phil was a great senator, first congressman and senator when I knew him back in the 1980s, but nobody wants to be lectured all the time and told that they're wrong. Not many members like to do that. So we have to provide explanations of the science and the economics that you've heard here today in a way that can be used in a friendly fashion as members try to calm the fears of their constituents. I think that's really the primary job that we have. Genesis Torres is here today from our staff, who's a scientist who works for us on the Hill all the time, trying to bring those sorts of messages. But it doesn't work on the Hill in a confrontational way. It doesn't work at a town meeting in a confrontational way. I very much like what we were told by Dr. Tinker earlier about how to say we all want the same thing. We want a good environment. We want health. We want wealth. We want long life expectancy. We want to protect this planet, and how we get there. I'm looking forward to us finding messages like that rather than the sort of very sterile confrontations I've observed this last year in Congress.
So how do we improve that, Merrie? How do we get there, as Dr. Rossiter is talking about? Do we need to look at what our general messaging is right now and just find a different way of saying it, or is the message wrong itself?
Well, I think I see different levels of messages. The first one, and you all have alluded to it, is the scare message. The world's going to end in 10 years. My heart just broke for that poor girl who came over, Greta, right? She's 16, right? Oh, how sad. I just wanted to give her a car. Okay. But first of all, I think we have to diffuse the fear message in a way that doesn't say, you're wrong, okay? And I've been collecting projections and props. I don't know how many of you remember the 1968 book, The Population Bomb? Yeah? I would encourage everybody to get a copy of it in paperback on Amazon, carry it around with you, or just cut the cover off. 1968. In the 1970s and 80s, hundreds of millions of people are going to starve to death. While you have read these words, 4 people will have died from starvation, most of them children. Did this happen? I mean, you all have been alive that day. You remember that? Did this happen? Okay, and the question is why? And it's because of progress. So you can't just say you're wrong about this, because the people projecting doom and gloom are looking 12 years into the future. You have to try and, in a semi-humorous way, cast some doubt on it. And the second part of the message, and I think, believe me, I'm going to talk to Dr. Burgess about this. If you remember my old boss, Ronald Reagan, and what I tell my clients constantly, we have to project confidence. And I think because many of you are scientists and you want to be even-handed and balanced, what you end up doing is not projecting confidence, but projecting a sense of questioning. Rather than saying, because this is, and I'm sure you've heard other people say this, and I apologize for the sensationalism of this, but at one end of the environmentalists, it's really become a religion. I mean, if you don't believe that, you are evil and sinning. But the only hope for that, instead of picking it apart, I have my own, no, it's supposed to work. Okay, is to say, I have confidence in faith. In part because I'm an American and I believe in innovation. But that framework has got to be articulated rather than just picking out the pieces and in the opposition's point of view, nitpicking. So it's not a statistical question in the world that I live in. It's a framing question about faith in progress and innovation and entrepreneurship with things to back it up.
So I want to stick with this point that you made just a minute ago, just really briefly, and we'll get back to Dr. Rossiter, but this idea of not starting with "you're wrong." There was a Harvard business study that demonstrated that even when presented with facts and evidence that contradicted someone's position or perspective on an issue, it actually hardened their position. That even though the facts clearly said that they were wrong, it actually hardened their position on things. So that's that confirmation bias that we see all the time. So if we don't start with "you're wrong," if someone says, the world's going to end in 10 years and then it doesn't happen, or the sea levels are rising but they've been rising the same level for 200 years, you can show them all this evidence and they still don't change their mind. What is the approach? What is a framework that we can start with that will start to ease that tension and get people to open their minds a little bit more about the facts?
Again, you have to start by projecting confidence and faith and plant a seed. I mean, these are conversations that don't come to fruition in one conversation. You have to, and then, as you could tell, I hope from even my brief presentation, you want to ask questions. Because when you frame questions that simply ask, like, are you willing to think about this? Okay. Almost everybody's going to say what? Yes. Even if they really don't mean it, they're going to say yes. That's all you can do. Because what happens, if people are willing to think about it, your goal is to change their antenna. That is, you want people to look for things that might reinforce that seed of change, as opposed to things that reinforce the narrative that's already set in stone. You can't do more than that. Unless somebody has come to you and say, please educate me, which I'm still waiting for. All you can do is enlist them, plant a seed, and create some sort of verbal image.
Dr. Rossiter, the problem with Congress is everybody is begging for Congress to do something. They need to do something. And so with that framing that they need to do something about climate change, it accepts the idea that we are heading in the wrong direction, or that the atmosphere, or that the climate is we're 10 years away from irreparable harm and all that. So even in the framing of you must do something, or a lawmaker has to solve this problem, accepts a framing that maybe some of us in this room would reject. How do lawmakers deal with that? If they're not doing something, then it looks like they're on the wrong side. How do you work with lawmakers to try and get them on the right side without causing any more harm?
Well, we're in a really unique environment, in my experience, for successful propaganda campaigns, and I've lived through a lot of them. I was an anti-Vietnam War activist when the domino theory was believed by 95% of America. And we all know about weapons of mass destruction and Ronald Reagan's freedom fighters in Nicaragua. We all know successful propaganda campaigns. But this one is the best I've ever seen. It has completely captured the entire Democratic Party, the entire Democratic-oriented media, to such an extent that when I see my old friends from the Central America congressional days of the 80s, like Ed Markey, who's now over here in the Senate, or Jim McGovern, who's now head of rules, where he used to staff rules over in the House, we really can't talk. They can't be seen with me, because they will get caught on social media, and that'll just be a negative for them. But that's reflecting something important. Our audience is not, in fact, the Washington Post or our friends at E&E News or the Democratic Party or people who read the New York Times or watch CNN, because our stuff cannot get on CNN, be discussed by any Democrat without them being run out of the party. Our stuff cannot be in the Washington Post, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a different audience, it seems to me, and I've learned this in my 9 or 10 months now running the coalition here on the Hill. We essentially, in our staff, with our scientists and people we bring in from our members, we only talk to Republicans on the Hill, because there's enough work for us to do there in terms of talking about the science. How do you decide there is a climate crisis? Remind members always to say that's a predicted climate crisis. It's an often predicted but never realized climate crisis. All the UN data show to date that we don't have any changes on the crisis variable since 1900. That's UN stuff. It's all about predictions. Even to get them saying that within the Republican Party would be a tremendous victory for us, because about half of Republican members of Congress simply find the easiest way out, would not go as far as our guest this morning in making critical comments, just saying, yes, we're going to deal with that issue. We have a different plan. So we have to think about who we're trying to reach. And all the media that we do, by the way, and I'm sure it's true for TPPF as well, down there with the good old Houston Chronicle. All the media we do are in conservative-leaning print, journals, and radio and TV. So We're in a very small space now, and the question is, how do you use it? Do we expand into social media to reach people? I know a lot of people out there are open to a little skepticism about Armageddon, and they tend not to live in the West Coast or the East Coast. They're sort of stuck in the middle there. If they're lucky, they'll bump into Mandy and Mississippi, but the rest of these places we have to do something about.
And I'll pose this question to both of you, following up on that. Have the left given us an opportunity here with the Green New Deal, that it's so extreme and these predictions are so outlandish and fantastical that even just your average person who does believe in climate change or thinks we need to do more with the environment and water and all, but because the Green New Deal is so crazy and so obviously not even about the environment and it's about more unionization and all of these things, have they given us an opportunity, or at least those on the right? Is this now an opportunity for us to really make up some ground with those folks who aren't on both of the coasts? And I'll pose to both of you.
Well, I'll quote our chair, the ecologist Patrick Moore, who says AOC is the gift that keeps on giving. I don't quite agree with him on that, because I think Ms. AOC has completely succeeded by driving the debate. It took a crazy idea called the Green New Deal and the end of fossil fuels, and it's now a major presidentially debated topic. So you can look at it one way or look at it at the other. The opportunity is there. This is the Katrina strategy. Al Gore pretty much invented it back with his movie in the mid-2000s, where you just take every horrible bit of weather you've ever seen and say it came because you were driving your SUV, against all the science that's in the UN IPCC reports. This notion that all the temperature change in the last 150 years came from humans is directly contradicted by the IPCC. They say about 1/4 degree out of the 1 degree is all they can claim. Similarly, their rates of changes of hurricanes and droughts and floods, rate of sea level rise. This is not IPCC stuff to say there's a storm in New York Harbor and the water came up and it came from carbon dioxide. But that is a very successful tactic. Their narrative is winning about what Katrina, Harvey, you name your storm. People automatically think. I think when I go out in the morning, oh, it's a hot day today. I think, I wonder if that's part of a climate change trend. And I know it's not.
So, Merrie, do you see that we have a real opportunity here, or is this just more doubling down on a narrative that's winning?
Well, the people that I pay attention to, and we do a lot of polling, and I don't know whether it's good to admit this or not, but in the people that I'm talking to and looking at what they're thinking about, they don't care about climate change. I mean, if you look at the list of things that they're caring about, and this actually goes from the far right over to about the mid-Demo. I mean, the list of issues that's on top of this is so big that climate change is way down there. So my advice is to look for people who you think will think about this, and whom you, again, as I said, you can plant a seed of reality, and people who will think about this. Most of our clients would think, they're probably not going to change their articulation, but they'll think about this. Mm-hmm. And then I try and look for anything I can to equip people with techniques. I love, big surprise, I love props. You can tell. Props also make great social media tools because you can tweet them out. This is, and I like newspaper articles because then you have the power of validation in the press. It's not me saying it, holding it. This is a great article. Linear Labs. They are a Fort Worth-based company, and they have invented an electric motor that they are putting in air conditioners. I mean, who knew? That's what progress looks like. And these things make great things to tweet out. So I think you have to sort of pick your audience. I have all the respect for my friend who may be sitting on my right, but apparently is not there politically.
We could switch if you
And so I think you have to pick your battles.
I did want to talk a little bit about the polling. I'm glad you brought that up. We have a couple more minutes, and then we'll get to your questions. But there is a real disconnect in the polling. It is true that very few people say that it is a top priority when it comes to energy and environment. However, when you ask people about things like solar and wind, it has an 85% approval rating, and that's what a lot of people are using to say, well, we need to drive this policy, or we need to subsidize these things because this is what the people want. How do you you combat something like that where clearly it's not a huge issue for people if you just ask them randomly, but then when it's put in their face, they say, oh, yeah, we want more of that?
Well, I think is that to me?
To either one of you.
Okay. I think that's you have to say, that's a great idea. You want to end up like Green Georgetown? Okay. Because what people say and what they're willing to vote on or pay become radically different. And the minute you put it to a vote and you say you want to pay X more for it, the numbers just fall out. It's a badly mixed metaphor, isn't it? They just fall out of bed, right? But
well, thank you. And we are intimately aware of that issue. Georgetown, Texas, is just north of Austin, and our executive director, Kevin Roberts, actually lived in Georgetown when they put those policies in place, and he now lives in south of Austin. So we definitely know that they affect people. So we'll go to questions. I've got a couple that I can start off with, but if anybody else out here, yes. Sure.
Over the last 20 years or so, the surveys done on the climate issue show that public opinion hasn't really shifted one way or another. You were right to say it's not really a big issue. You know, if you ask what are your main concerns, but if people are asked really about climate change, there's a party political split in the U.S. Essentially more or less 50-50, around 50-50, and that hasn't really shifted at all. How do you explain that, and this question for you, that despite this kind of inundation of hyped up, alarming stories in the media, which are getting shriller and shriller, people are not actually shifting their views on this issue?
Well, I hate to be the one to deliver bad news. I mean, but you've gotten a taste of it from me already with the HP commercial. Is that the awful truth is that facts don't matter. Okay? The even worse truth is that people don't read. Okay? Which means if you're going to try and tap them, you need images, storytelling. You need the network of person-to-person communication, and it's a very different way of thinking. And it's very frustrating to people who have substantive backgrounds because it drives them nuts. At my class at the Cox School of Business, I have graduate students. They're reading the same things that I was reading at Columbia Business School 35 years ago. The Economist, the Financial Times, and then I say, how many of you are reading them in hard copy? How many hands go up? None, right? And then about once a year or so, I will actually videotape them reading them. And they read this stuff on their phones, which I can, and they'll look at it and it will say a paragraph. Read more? Nah. Read more? Yeah. And then so they start reading. And then they start, and then they say, oh, Dr. Rossiter's involved with this. Hey, look at this. And they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth while they're reading the material. Okay? It drives me nuts. But the implications for how we produce material are huge. And I've been nagging my clients about this for years because most of my clients are still putting out material rather than thinking about how people are consuming it. Mm-hmm. So that's not a very good answer to your question. It's sort of a description of the problem.
Dr. Rossiter, just a point of privilege. I wanted to get to this question, so I'll do it here. Looking at Republican lawmakers, it doesn't really feel like there's much of a fight. There's no legislative vehicles, or it doesn't feel like there's very many that sort of try to capture our messaging on the right. Have the Republicans ceded ground on this issue so much that we now can't go back to a more sane policy atmosphere?
The answer is no. The Republican Party has not really established a position, as far as I can tell. You have a lot of skepticism about alarm that is just good gut in your bones. I don't always believe what I'm told by the New York Times and by the Secretary of Energy sort of stuff. But you do have a movement, which I've been reading a lot about, in which climate activist-oriented, or at least for political purposes, House members in particular, are getting together on the Republican side for some sort of legislation that is going to put a tax. We heard the wonderful James Baker mentioned earlier, who I adored, of course, for his wonderful work at the end of the wars in Central America. But he is Mr. Carbon Tax, and he's got a lot of pull-up here with Mr. Schultz, and I think you will see legislation coming, at least to be introduced, to show, as Mr. McCarthy said, the leader in the House, we care. We want our younger voters to know we care about global warming. I think that's a very powerful strain within the Republican Party. But you have the other strain also on the Hill, where there are members willing to stand up and take on the science, take on the crazy economics. It's a bit of a battle within the House Republican caucus right now, and that's why information to be provided to them is so important. The Senate remains a great mystery to me and a disappointment to me because the Republicans, actually, you may not have known this, are in control of the Senate. And they could be having a hearing every day, the way the House does, telling the other narrative about the wonderful TPPF messaging on energy and what it does for you and how we try to clean up the world, but it's good to get rich and live longer and have the money to do it. They could be having as many hearings as the House does, which pushes an alarmist narrative, and I believe they've done zero. Unfortunately, Mr. Inhofe, I think, is running Armed Services now, who used to really bear the torch and really had to learn the science enough to do it. So to me, the Senate has been a wasteland, and there's even rumors that, I won't say names, some staff have left the Senate who work on our issues and gone over to work in the House. Good Lord, to be in the minority? At least they know there's going to be action over there.
Well, we have time for probably one more question. Just want to tell a little anecdote about how much work we have to do on this issue. We did focus groups last year. We did 4 focus groups last year, the year before, and we just start off with a little light, chatting about the issues. And we asked everyone, where do you get your energy from? Where does power come from? And of course, people would say, that comes from coal or it comes from gas. But every single one of the focus groups, somebody said electricity. And so we have a lot of work to do in terms of trying to get people to understand that the power doesn't come from the wall or from the socket. It actually comes from somewhere. So we have a lot of work to do on this. Yes, we have one last question.
Yeah, I hope this isn't too rambling a question. I'm kind of trying to phrase it appropriately. You mentioned, you've showed the population bomb in Paul Ehrlich's book. If you read that book, it's a very sinister book. He talks about increasing death rates around the world and restricting new technologies to poor countries. It was a very dark and sinister message that he had, and had impacts. It cost lives in poor countries. And if we're having a religious debate, I think you're seeing the same kind of sinister policies, although phrased better in this modern day. But if we're having a religious discussion, we have a better religion. We have the good facts, but our story is better. And I just trying to figure out how we sell this better religion. I mean, the Mayans had religion that involved sacrificing people. A better religion replaced it. Can we find a better science-based religion to replace this sinister, misanthropic religion that's being pushed at the moment?
Merrie, yeah.
Is this how we have to end? Because it's not a question of science. It's a question, really, of confidence in American exceptionalism, of which science is a great part, but that's really a question of freedom. I mean, the country, what founded the country, in my view, and what's made us what we are, is the freedom as individuals to innovate and achieve success. And that's what's thrown off all these other things. And you don't counter. I mean, the reason I love the population bomb is because you can ask people. I mean, it's the cover alone is just great copy. People starving, children dead. Then you say, did this happen? And everybody knows it didn't. So my goal in that is to shake the faith in the current dystopian projections, which are not going to happen either. But I don't think you counter that by science, because the science is yet to be invented. You counter it really by a belief in goodness and innovation, and a personal commitment and projection of that confidence. I'm sitting in a bunch of scientists. Oh, save me, Dr. Rossiter.
Yes. I would think we should talk about vision. That is, their vision is the dystopian, the end of life. And I get this all the time. I talk to everybody I can, of course. I go across the country speaking and end up with a lot of liberal groups talking. And there is, as friends of mine on the left say, a sort of apocalyptic left Malthusian left, Luddite left, hidden under many of my colleagues in the Democratic Party. It's a belief that, God, with all these people and all this stuff and all this gross overconsumption, of course we're going to run out of space and people. They do deeply believe in the Malthusian sort of Luddite vision. I think we have to have a better vision, and that's one of the things I've learned this year, in the last couple of years, working on the energy poverty videos with TPPF, and the way that message always resonates. If I'm testifying or giving a speech, and I start with the pictures of Africans in their huts burning dung while they cook and getting bronchial diseases and dying at age 55, that makes the left and the Democratic Party very nervous to see that. And they will end up saying things like, you won't believe it, in public. Okay, we know that fossil fuels did a lot of good for the world. We know that CO2 is a plant food. We know, but we've got this apocalypse coming. The fact that they're even willing to grant any discussion about the benefits of people living longer, giving their children more opportunity to go to college and live a good life in Africa. I think we have a vision, in honor of which, and of your home country, I wore my shirt today. Anybody know what this shirt's called in South Africa?
Is that the Mantiba?
It's a Madiba. It's a Madiba, which is Nelson Mandela's clan name. When Mandela got out of Robben Island, he didn't want to put a tie on very often, so he asked the greatest designers in South Africa, come up with formal attire I can wear anywhere and won't have to put a tie on. So this is called Madiba after him. And so the joke in South Africa is first he freed the black people so they could vote, and then he freed the white businessmen so they didn't have to put a tie on. We should be talking about what South Africa did for its people with a firm commitment after independence, which was to get universal electricity in the country, which they did, and they invested in that. And of course, with universal electricity, you can clean the water. Water takes a lot of pumping and repumping to get the water clean. And so South Africa is the only country in sub-Saharan Africa where there's essentially universal electricity, and you can drink the water. Everybody who goes there can drink the water without getting sick. These are huge achievements. It lets people live longer and their families can prosper. Probably somewhere in this messaging we're going to do, we have to talk about the benefits to families and children of using fossil fuels responsibly to increase your health and wealth so you can take care of the world.
Well, I don't have a Mandiba, but I do have an environmentally friendly green tie that I wore today for this panel. Well, thank you. Please help me thank our guests.